You walk into a room full of successful people, and suddenly your personality changes. Your voice becomes more careful. Your thoughts become slower. You start editing yourself in real time. And the strange part is, you don't even know you're doing it until later. Later that night, you replay the conversation in your head. You wonder why you sounded so unnatural, why you laughed differently, why you tried so hard to seem normal. Visual, person standing silently at a crowded rooftop event. It feels fake, but also feels automatic. And that's the part most people never understand. Because this reaction is usually not about confidence. It's about survival. And your brain may have learned this survival pattern a very long time ago. Most people think insecurity is loud, but this kind is quiet. It hides itself inside politeness, inside overthinking, inside becoming smaller around people you secretly admire. You tell yourself things like, don't sound stupid, say something impressive, act natural, don't let them see you nervous. But the harder you try to appear normal, the more disconnected from yourself you become. Visual, slow-moving light patterns across a dark room. And eventually, something strange happens. You stop experiencing the conversation. You start managing it. Your attention splits in two. One part of your brain is trying to listen. The other part is monitoring how you are being perceived. Psychologists sometimes call this self-monitoring. It's when your brain becomes hyper-aware of social feedback. Tiny facial expressions, tone shifts, pauses. Your nervous system begins scanning for signals that answer one hidden question. Am I acceptable here? And if you grew up in environments where acceptance felt unpredictable, your brain may have learned to constantly adapt yourself to maintain connection. Not because you're manipulative, not because you're weak, because your nervous system learned that authenticity could cost belonging. Visual, child sitting quietly at a dinner table while adults argue softly. Some people learned this in childhood homes where emotional approval was inconsistent. You were praised when you performed well, ignored when you expressed certain emotions, accepted when you were useful, calm, funny, intelligent, easy. Over time, your brain started building what psychologists call a social self, a version of you designed for safety. And around successful people, that survival self becomes highly active, because successful people often trigger comparison. Not just external comparison, identity comparison. Their confidence quietly forces you to confront the gap between who you are and who you think you should be. That's why these moments feel emotionally intense even when nothing bad is happening. Your brain isn't reacting to the person. It's reacting to what the person represents. Status, competence, approval, value, visual, abstract brain animation with neural pathways lighting up. Neuroscience shows that social rejection activates many of the same brain regions as physical pain, especially the anterior cingulate cortex. Your brain processes exclusion as danger, which means if your identity feels unstable, being around highly confident or successful people can unconsciously feel threatening. Not physically threatening, psychologically threatening, like standing under a bright light that exposes every insecurity you try to hide. And this creates a painful contradiction. You want connection with these people, but you also feel emotionally unsafe around them. So your brain creates a performance, not a conscious one, a protective one, like an emotional camouflage system. Visual, chameleon slowly changing colors on a branch. Imagine your personality like water. In safe environments, water flows naturally, but under social pressure, it freezes into shape. Every sentence becomes calculated. Every reaction becomes filtered. You stop expressing yourself spontaneously because your nervous system shifts from expression mode into protection mode. And protection mode always prioritizes safety over authenticity. This is why you can feel fake even when you're trying your hardest to be genuine. Because the problem isn't dishonesty. The problem is over-adaptation. Your brain learned to survive by becoming psychologically adjustable. And if you do this long enough, something deeper starts happening. You lose track of which version of yourself is real. Visual, mirror reflection slowly distorting. You become different around different people. More intelligent here, more quiet there, more agreeable somewhere else. And eventually, your identity starts feeling fragmented. Not because you have no personality, but because your brain became too skilled at shape-shifting. Carl Jung once described something similar through the concept of the persona, the social mask designed to help us function in society. But when the mask becomes stronger than the self underneath it, you begin feeling emotionally unreal. That's why some people leave social events feeling exhausted instead of energized. They weren't connecting. They were performing emotional calculations for hours. And the brain burns enormous energy doing this. Especially the prefrontal cortex, the area involved in self-control, and social evaluation. Which explains why you may replay conversations later in bed. Your brain is still trying to solve the social equation. Still searching for mistakes. Still asking, did they like me? Did I sound insecure? Did I belong there? Visual. Person lying awake staring at the ceiling. But here's the important part. This pattern is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that your brain adapted intelligently to environments where social acceptance felt emotionally important. Your nervous system became observant, flexible, careful. Those traits protected you once. The problem is that survival strategies often continue long after the danger disappears. Your brain still acts like every social interaction determines your worth, even when it doesn't. And changing this pattern does not start with forcing confidence. It starts with retraining safety, slowly, quietly, from the inside out. The first principle is this. Stop trying to impress people you admire. Instead, practice staying psychologically present around them. That sounds simple, but neurologically, it changes everything. Because attention controls emotional state. The more attention you place on monitoring yourself, the more your brain activates threat detection systems. But when you redirect attention outward, into curiosity, observation, listening, your nervous system becomes less self-defensive. Visual. Coffee shop conversation with relaxed body language. For example, instead of asking, how do I sound right now? Ask, what is this person actually like? That tiny shift moves your brain away from self-surveillance and back into connection. The second principle, notice when admiration turns into self-erasure. This happens constantly. You meet someone successful and unconsciously assume their personality is more correct than yours. So you begin shrinking your natural reactions. Behavioral psychology calls this social conditioning. Your brain associates higher status people with greater authority, which means you automatically start adjusting yourself around them. The solution is not arrogance. It's differentiation. The ability to stay emotionally connected to someone without abandoning yourself. Visual. Two people walking side by side without speaking. A practical example. If you naturally speak slowly, stop speeding up your speech to match confident people around you. That small act teaches your nervous system something powerful. I can remain myself and still belong. The third principle, reduce performance behaviors. Performance behaviors are subtle actions meant to secure approval. Over-explaining, forced smiling, agreeing too quickly, pretending to know things you don't. These behaviors temporarily reduce anxiety, but they reinforce a dangerous message in the brain. The real me is not enough. In neuroscience, repeated behaviors strengthen neural pathways, meaning every time you abandon authenticity for safety, your brain learns to repeat it faster next time. Visual, neural pathways forming like glowing roads. So begin interrupting the pattern gently, not dramatically. If you don't know something, allow yourself to say, I actually don't know much about that. Notice the discomfort, then survive it, because your brain needs new evidence. Evidence that honesty does not automatically lead to rejection. The fourth principle, separate worth from performance. This is difficult because many people were unconsciously taught the opposite. That value must be earned socially, through intelligence, humor, achievement, likability. But psychologically, this creates conditional self-worth. And conditional self-worth creates chronic social anxiety because every interaction feels like a test. Visual. Notebook with one sentence written. You are not an audition. One helpful mental model is this. Imagine your identity as a house. Most people build their house on other people's reactions. Compliments become walls. Approval becomes the foundation. So when criticism appears, the whole structure shakes. But stable identity works differently. It is built internally first, then shared externally, which means successful people stop feeling like judges and start feeling like humans. Humans with insecurities you simply cannot see yet. Over time, something subtle begins changing. You stop entering rooms trying to earn permission to exist. You stop treating conversations like performances. And strangely, you often become more socially confident without trying to. Because real confidence is not loud self-belief. It is reduced self-protection. Visual. Person walking alone at night under soft city lights. You no longer need to constantly edit yourself. You no longer panic over small imperfections. You no longer feel responsible for controlling everyone's perception of you. And maybe for the first time, you experience what authenticity actually feels like. Not complete fearlessness, just less resistance, less acting, less internal noise. The goal was never to become impressive enough to relax. The goal was to realize you were allowed to exist before impressing anyone. Visual. Empty room with sunlight slowly moving across the floor. And maybe that's why being around successful people feels so uncomfortable sometimes. Not because they are better than you, but because they accidentally activate the part of you that still believes worth must be performed. The part that learned survival through adaptation. The part that became a social shapeshifter just to feel safe. But awareness changes things. Because once you can see the performance, you slowly stop confusing it for your identity. Visual. Waves moving slowly against the shore. And one day, you may notice something quiet but important. You're sitting with successful people again. But this time, you're no longer trying to become someone else in the room. You're simply there. And for the first time in a long time, that feels enough.